we have coming up here in this segment one of just my favorite politicians. He's a deep man. He thinks a lot. He's a lofty intellectual. He knows his history. He knows where he came from, and he absolutely knows where he's going. And you are going to find him interesting because we're going to talk about some things that you might not know about our own Lieutenant Governor, Peter Kinder. Welcome to the show. So we have some little problem with him. I think we're getting him, and we'll be right back with him. But until then, we'll just continue to talk a little bit about the Arizona situation. And what I want to tell you about that I think is so shocking and really undeniably just hiding out in the media, you're just not hearing it, is who these people are that are behind all these efforts in Arizona. They're not the people on the ground. They're bringing them in buses. Many of these are paid for by union bosses, by liberal groups, literally by communist front groups. And I know I say that and I sound like a crazy loon, but give me a moment because I can back myself up on this. I've got a piece of paper in my hand that I have read from before, and you've heard me talk about this. It is from the Revolutionary Communist Party USA. This is the propaganda that they are passing out. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about that here in just a moment, but I think we do have the Lieutenant Governor on the line now, if I'm not mistaken. Lieutenant Governor?
Hey.
There he is.
How are you?
Awesome.
Gina, it's great to join you.
Great to have you today. Thank you for joining us on our first ever Dr. Gina show on the new Truth Talk 630.
Yes, your maiden voyage.
The maiden voyage. And I wanted to have you on for a couple reasons. One, because you handle some legislation that's just not easy. You're doing some things that are out of the box. You've been on my political A-list, which we're going to continue here on Truth Talk 630 as well. But also, there are some things that I know about you from being your friend for a number of years and being a big fan. And I want to make sure some of our listeners know some of these things about you. And so the first thing I want to do, though, is talk about your lawsuit. How is that coming? Your lawsuit on Obamacare.
Yes, thank you, Gina. And by the way, I'm having some trouble hearing you. You're kind of very low volume and coming in and out, but I heard about 90%. First of all, I'm honored to be on your show on the first day. Thank you. We are days away from filing our lawsuit. We will file here in the Eastern District of the federal courts of our state. That we'll be filing in the next few days.
And this is what is so exciting about you, Governor Kinder, is that you are willing to not just work within the framework you've been given as Lieutenant Governor, but you're willing to step outside of that. And if that means you have to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit and get other plaintiffs involved with you, you're willing to take the extra time and then even on top of that to have to raise the money. These are the kind of people we need today in politics. And that's why I think it's really important to ask you to talk to us a little bit about you and your background and what sort of gives you the courage to lead like that, because it really is unusual. Most politicians, they do their job, they pass laws or they don't pass them and they go home.
Yeah.
That's not what you're doing here. This is different.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I am a native of Cape Girardeau. I grew up there. I've always been sort of St. Louis oriented because this is the big city we came to go to the baseball games. My mother would drag her 4 sons to the symphony and the art museum, and where we didn't appreciate it as much as the ballpark. But I grew up there with the Limbaugh boys. There were 4 Kinder boys and 5 Limbaugh boys, 3 brothers and 2 brothers who were first cousins. So there were 9 boys who grew up like brothers together. Our parents were best friends. And so there's a lot of Limbaugh influence from Rush's father, who is where he got his analytical powers from, and also his mother, from whom I would say he got his sense of humor. and his mother, Millie, was my mother's closest friend in the world, and the families are intertwined for 3 generations. My mother and Rush's mother, Millie, were a singing duo for 50 years in Cape until the very end of the 1990s when Millie got sick, and she passed away 10 years ago. So those families are close. I got into this not to warm a seat, but to change the course of events in a conservative direction, and in the direction of expanding our freedoms and our individual, and strengthening the teachings of the founders that made this country great, and that sadly we're drifting away from now. If the Obama, Pelosi, Reid crowd has their way, we are running in the opposite direction. And so I'm involved in an effort to try to yank us back to our founders and framers of the Constitution and the moorings that they gave us that are so precious.
And I know you don't have a lot of time, Governor, because I know that you have an event you have to get to. But for those listeners out there, this is sort of an embarrassing question, but almost every time I say your name, do you know what people say right after I say your name?
What?
What does a lieutenant governor do? So I'm just going to straight up ask you, can you tell us what the lieutenant governor does?
The lieutenant governor is analogous at the state level to the vice president of the United States in the sense that both are constitutional. The VP is the president of the United States Senate in Washington and the president of the Missouri Senate, so preside over that body. The lieutenant governor in Missouri is the acting governor when the state, when the governor leaves the state and transfers power. And in the previous term, 05 to 09, with Governor Blunt, he transferred power to me 105 days. I was acting governor. So I signed bills, made appointments, called out the National Guard to fight a flood in northeast Missouri, and did everything the governor does.
And tell me this.
I'm also the official advocate for our state's senior population, which consumes a lot of my time. I work on economic development, jobs, and urban education. Increasing school choice is a special passion of mine.
I know that it is. Tell me this, too, because I know you're a fabulous historian, and I cannot have you on my show without the opportunity to let you tell our listeners something they don't know. And I thought maybe an appropriate question for you might be your favorite lieutenant governor in Missouri history.
No. I'm not that much of a student of lieutenant governors.
Well, then we can just go with politicians.
I've known a few. Bill Phelps was a great guy. Bill Phelps and I, who you know, we are the only two Republicans elected to this office since 1928, which is what now, 82 years. That's a long time. So I have another piece of history for you, though.
Yes.
Today's gun rights ruling, today's ruling that struck down the gun control bill in Chicago and vindicated the Second Amendment rights of all Americans, was only a 5-4 vote, underscoring again and emphasizing again that elections are important, that elections have consequences, that elections of presidents and senators is who puts people on the Supreme Court who understand how to read our Constitution and not make law but interpret law. And this was an enormously important ruling today, 5-4 in the McDonald versus the city of Chicago. But you know who Mr. McDonald is. If you watch on TV tonight, you'll see him. He is a distinguished African-American resident, distinguished gentleman in the city of Chicago. And that took me back to the history of gun control laws, which were passed by racist Southern lawmakers after the Civil War. Why? Why did racist Southern lawmakers pass them? Because they wanted to deny African Americans the right to defend themselves.
Aha, that's the part you don't hear on the news.
Means of disarming African Americans in the southern and the border states. There was too much of this in our state of Missouri as well. And they disarmed them, and then the KKK could come along and have their way with black families, terrorizing them because they were disarmed. That is the original history of gun control laws.
And that is despicable. And that is a piece of history that I know a lot of our listeners weren't aware of. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate having you on today on the, as you said, the maiden voyage of Truth Talk 630. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Kinder.
Thank you so much, Gina. All best wishes to you with this show and your wonderful family, and I look forward to coming back on.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.